Hi, this is Sarah Linger with Yellow Cat Publishing, and this video is to demonstrate bunches of little wins, awesomeness points, hard skills, and soft skills. The technique of counting out loud will be used to demonstrate bunches of little wins and keeping track of awesomeness. Bunches of little wins are small things that a student can do 100% perfectly 100% of the time. They can be as small as a single note with a single finger, or a single beat in a measure, two beats, a transitional beat between one measure and the next. It can be a scale fingering with the right hand. It can be a scale fingering with the left hand. Bunches of little wins are basically anything that can be broken down into a small thing and practiced repeatedly. Awesomeness points are the way of keeping track of bunches of little wins. One of the things that students need to understand is that things need to be repeated to be improved. And it's a lot easier to repeat 10, 20, 30 times a small fragment of music that lasts 1 or 2 seconds than it is to repeat a whole piece. When my students are asking, well, how much is enough? My question for them is, well, what do you think? Because if you're on an airplane, for example, and the pilot is landing the plane for the first time, is landing a plane once enough before you're on the plane? Is landing the plane twice? Is 10 times enough? Is 100 times enough? The same thing can be said about the person who's giving you your vaccination shots. Do you want to be their first one, or do you want them to have done it for 100, 200 times, 1,000 times? Or the dentist who's pulling your tooth, or anything that a professional does, if you're paying them to do it, you want them to have practiced it over and over and over again before they practice it on you. So you want to encourage students to do things over and over and over again, not just once or twice, but 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times during the course of a week. Skills can be broken down into hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills are skills that improve by repetition, and they use muscles. Soft skills also need to be developed, but they use your brain rather than your muscles, so you have to develop them in a slightly different way. Counting out loud is a hard skill to begin with and a soft skill later on. The actual counting out loud is a hard skill because you're using facial muscles, your vocal cords, your tongue, in order to be able to count. And so if you're teaching it to a student, then it has to be repeated over and over and over and over and over again because you need to develop the muscles. When a student understands the concept of counting out loud, then you can start loading the exercise, namely having them count out loud when they're doing something besides just counting. Counting out loud is extremely important because it gives a student a tool to figure out what they're doing. And the figuring out what you're doing or analyzing mistakes is crucial for soft skill development. Counting out loud, how does one do it? The first thing is to just simply count without playing anything or without clapping. And the way I do this with my students is we first figure out what exactly they're going to be counting. And usually I use a piece. So the piece that they're counting is one that they are currently working on. What I have here is the bunches of little wins tracking sheet for level 2, and you can see that it's got a date, the section and goal, awesomeness points, and soft skills awesomeness. If a student is incapable of doing something 100% perfectly 100% of the time, the first thing we do is we slow down, or we play hands separately, or shorten the section. And there are other things that can be added to this list, but these are the starting points. If I'm teaching counting out loud, and the piece that I'm going to use to demonstrate this is green sleeves. It's a level 2 piece. It requires the use of both hands, but it's still on a single staff. The counting is 1 and 2 and 3 and. It has dotted quarter notes, eighth notes, dotted half notes, and a pickup beat for the first beat. When I teach bunches of little wins in a lesson, I will write the date. And the section and goal, this is really the goal of what the bunches of little wins are. And so in this case, it's 1 and 2 and 3 counting. So 1 and 2 and 3 and counting out loud. And this is not really a writing exercise, so abbreviations are fine. And the only person that has to understand the writing is you and your student. Awesomeness points build up really quickly if you have small, finite sections to work on. In the case of counting out loud, what I do is I put this piece of paper in my students' hands and give them a pencil, and then when they count out loud, I have them do a downstroke on a tick mark to do this. Here would be counting out loud. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and. When they're done counting out loud, I'll ask them some questions like, did you count evenly? If they counted evenly and they know it, then I would give them a point in the soft skills awesomeness category. If they counted unevenly and they were aware of it, then I would also give them a point because I want them to be analytical thinkers, and soft skills awesomeness is about thinking. In this example, here we have the green sleeves. It starts out on beat 3, and the down hand or the left hand is playing the first note with the second finger. The right hand comes in on beat 1 of the second measure with the thumb. One of the most difficult things students have, particularly beginning students, is to get the idea of 3 and, namely starting on beat 3 rather than beat 1. The first thing that I do when I have a student who is getting confused with the counting is I have them play just beat 3 or the pickup beat. And I'll have them do it 10, 15, 20, 30 times because it doesn't take very long to do, like less than a minute, but it cements the idea of beat 3 being the starting beat and gets the counting off correctly from the beginning. Here is beat 3 of green sleeves. 3 and, 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 3 and. And you can continue this for as long as you think it takes for the student to get it. Counting and starting on a 3 is difficult, so it may take a while. They may do it when you're there, and then you try it again in a few minutes, and they forget that they're starting on beat 3, so then you go back again. Once you're done with beat 3, then you would move on to the next section, which would be the pickup beat plus the first beats of measure 2. Then you would go on to the next measure, and you would just do small sections a little bit at the time. Rather than worrying about counting the whole piece, we're just doing it in such a small section that they can't argue and say that it's too difficult. Over here, the abbreviations, GS stands for green sleeves, LH is left hand, B3 is beat 3, and CA is counting out loud. If they get it off, like in the first 2 beats that I played, I wasn't on. I was saying 3 and, but I hadn't yet played. If they can identify that, then they get soft skills here. Because identifying mistakes is as important as actually repeating things that are correctly played. Counting out loud is actually one of the foundational things of Bunches of Little Wins for soft skills awesomeness. Because again, if you're unable to figure out what you've done, how do you know how to correct it? When developing hard skills and soft skills, hard skills are fairly straightforward and easy to develop because they come from repetition. And it can't be 1 or 2 times, it has to be 10 or 20. And during a lesson, it's evident how quickly small awesomeness adds up, because by the time that we're finished with a lesson, I will tell my students how hard they worked, and we have a measurement of it by all of the small things that they did perfectly. It's not uncommon at the end of the lesson to have racked up 100, 120, 150 awesomeness points in even just a half an hour. The student isn't concerned about whether or not the point was given for counting one beat or 10 beats. And so by the end of the lesson, they can be very impressed with how hard they worked as well. Soft skills are less straightforward to develop because they require thinking. And so as soon as a student makes a mistake, I ask them, did you make a mistake? If they don't know the answer, then I'll say, well, why don't you play it again and see what you did? If they still don't do it, if they still can't see what they did, then I'll have them play it again, and then I'll tell them what they did. And you want, when you're identifying mistakes, to use as specific of a language as possible. So for example, if your student played something and they used the fifth finger instead of the fourth finger and played a B instead of an A, then I would say you played the B with your fifth finger when you should have played the A with your fourth. Or if they've been counting out loud and they played a note early, which is quite common, then we would say, well, you played the A half a beat early because it was supposed to be on beat 3 and you were playing it as I was saying and. The more specific you are with mistake identification, the easier it will be for your students to develop the soft skills. I encourage mistakes because if you cannot identify what you've done and what you should be doing, then correcting it on your own is quite difficult. If you make a mistake and are unable to play something through, then you shorten the section, you make it smaller, and you do everything you possibly can to totally understand what you're doing. This way of keeping track of awesomeness is having massive payouts in my studio. It has been several months since a student makes a mistake and goes back to the beginning of the piece to correct the mistake. My 7 and 8-year-olds are counting dotted rhythms out loud as they're playing without too much difficulty. My teenage students are breaking down trills, turns, and appoggiaturas into 1 and 2 beat sections, counting it out loud, checking their fingering, and getting it with the correct rhythm. And a lot of this is starting to happen at home. When we do awesomeness of the lesson, part of awesomeness is persistence. It's very easy to get started on something and then not carry it through. The learning how to write what the section and the goal is a soft skill. So in the lessons, I'll do it, and for my younger students, I'll write in ideas on sections and goals for their own practice. Bunches of little wins is a way of quantifying what students are doing. And it's a process that's taking months to develop because it's a habit that I'm working on forming. However, the kids who have absorbed the ideas are using the idea of bunches of little wins not just for piano practice but for other musical instrument practices and studying for tests. The idea of breaking things down into its small elemental sections, figuring them out before going on, is also cutting down significantly on the time it takes to learn a piece. This cutting down significantly has a huge impact on their personal success and sense of progress.